Welcome, everybody. Welcome to episode 100 of PEM Rules. Very big milestone, very exciting. Thank you first for all of you, everybody who's been listening to PEM Rules, supporting the podcast, emailing me, contacting me, and thank you for all the guests who have come on the show over the years. I'm super excited because today is my attempt to give you guys, the listeners, something back for all your loyalty and supporting the podcast. So today I'm going to be talking to Dr. Rick Saladino, my mentor, somebody who's been working as a pediatric emergency physician for many years, and more importantly, has been hiring physicians for so many years. And because of that, I wanted to bring Rick back to the show so he can give his advice for you guys, the listeners, so you guys can hopefully nail the best job ever upon the completion of your training, or maybe you just looking for a job because you've been to the same ER for a while, or maybe you're not even an ER doctor. This discussion hopefully will benefit any physician or clinician looking for his or her next job. Welcome, Rick, back to the show. Thank you very, very much for joining, and thank you for doing this little project with me. PEM Rule episode 100, very exciting. And this was something that I thought about many months ago, Rick, in episode 100. I really wanted to do something that hopefully will benefit my listeners. And my listeners, I don't know for a fact, but I do believe many of them are trainees, medical students, residents, probably some attendings as well, who are either going to be looking for a job when they finish training or maybe thinking of a different job in a different place. And I thought of something I can do for them and maybe talk about the advice someone experienced like you who has been a physician for a long time, has hired many physicians, can give some advice and some tips. So that's what this episode is about. Those of you who are listening, you may have heard an announcement a few months ago about some survey I sent out asking some basic questions about the job search process. We're going to look into those answers today. So thank you, everybody who filled up the survey. Today we'll discuss the survey, the results, and get some advice from Dr. Saladino, who's my mentor and used to be my boss at the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh. As part of his role, Rick had the opportunity to hire dozens of PEM and some other non-PEM physicians. Is that right, Rick? Not just PEM physicians and clinicians?
Sure. First, thanks so much for having me back. I love your podcasts. I listen faithfully, and it's really such a pleasure to be back speaking with you. And I love the fact that you're doing a bit of a sidebar here within the context of emergency medicine and pediatric emergency medicine.
To remind the listeners, Rick trained in pediatrics at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center, followed by a fellowship at Boston Children's Hospital. And then, Rick, you stayed as faculty at Harvard Medical School, Boston Children's Hospital for 12 years, right? Then went to Pittsburgh and was recruited by them as the division chief of pediatric emergency medicine and the medical director of the Children's Hospital Emergency Department. You did that for 18 years. Stepping down as chief in 2019, and now you serve as a senior associate vice chair of faculty affairs. That's a big title. In the Department of Pediatrics and the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. Not surprisingly, as I knew, Rick still works clinically. I do remember Rick telling me when I was a fellow, he cannot not see patients. So that's still true.
That's a double negative. Absolutely correct. Yes.
Perfect.
Yes, all of that is accurate. And as division chief for those 18 years, I was involved in a number of recruitments of faculty, both I would say primarily entry level faculty, those just finishing their fellowships, but occasionally mid-career faculty recruits. And I would add that during that time, we built a very significant advanced practice provider roster, and I was involved with those recruitments as well in partnership with the leadership there. So I've done a lot of recruitment over the years. And as you know, Jaron, when you are part of a fellowship program, you're mentoring your fellows not only through the art and science of emergency medicine, but also professional development. And that includes looking forward to what are the next steps for them. Sometimes they stay with you. We love them when that happens, but we're also proud to send those folks out. And I've helped a number of fellows and young faculty think about and then go through the recruitment process to get either their first job or a new job in their career. So it's really an important element of how we think about training our professionals.
No, it's very nice to hear. And I remember one of your rules that I discussed that in the podcast. You said at some point in your career, it's not about your success, but the success of the people around you. I guess this is kind of related to what we're speaking about today. I will say lastly that Rick was a guest on episode 29 of PEM Rules. And that episode, just so you know, Rick, as of today, was downloaded 457 times by different users from 17 different countries and 37 states within the US, just so you know.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. So let's discuss the survey result. And the first question I asked was, what is the first emotion that comes to mind when you think about applying for a job? Fear, dread, excitement, anticipation, etc. About 3/4 of the people who answered the survey, Rick answered, indicating applying for a job evoked a feeling of excitement or anticipation. 1/4 responded that anxiety described how they felt when thinking about applying for a job. So what do you think about those results?
Not really surprising. I know that you have looked for new jobs a few times, so have I. And we've talked to our colleagues and our fellows about this whole process. So my sense is that, when you're thinking about looking for a job, we're going to feel all sorts of emotions, maybe even a little bit of that dread because it's such a daunting process. But I think it's important then to recognize that there'll be a little bit of fear mixed with this excitement and anticipation. And that's what our survey showed us. It's a big thing to take that next step in your career. So, why are all those emotions part of it? Well, we tend to be excited. We like to be excited when we're exploring possible new surroundings, new jobs, new geography. It's a little bit like buying a house. And if you have purchased a new house, you'll know that one of the things you wonder is, well, what's the basement like? And so for me, when I think about that, it's thinking about, well, what will my new prospective boss be like? What will my salary be like? Will I have to put up a fight for salary and benefits? And then beyond that, will I fit in with my new colleagues? Will I be respected for the skills that I bring? So there's a lot going on in our heads, I think. And all those emotions, I hope, provide fuel for kind of sort of focused exploration that will then lead to negotiations that are necessary elements of a job search.
Very good. Looking into the next question and kind of transitioning to the more practical aspect of the process, I then asked the listeners, what do you wonder most about the application process? Answers that seem to dominate were, what is negotiable? Can I ask for a signing bonus? Can I negotiate my starting date? What will the benefits be? What happens if I get more than one offer, etc.? It's interesting, Rick, to combine some of those possible responses. Nearly 90% of the people who responded indicated that they wondered most about what was negotiable and what can they ask for. So what do we tell the listeners about that?
Well, it doesn't surprise me that 90% of the responses were in this domain of, just what is negotiable? What can I ask for? It's the question I guess get asked most commonly from fellows looking at their first faculty position, but also I get asked from our colleagues who are at their mid-career changes, and even from faculty who are being recruited for higher level jobs, say a chief or a program leadership position, fellowship directorships, those sorts of things. And I'm going to start a little bit on the negative side and just to kind of set expectations. I would say that most of the time, most things in a contract are not going to be negotiable. That sounds a bit dismal, but it's really not. What I'm saying is that when we're talking about a faculty or a staff member position, although not universally, most of the basic elements of a contract are not negotiable. They're sort of boilerplate. And that's really true at academic institutions, maybe not so much in community positions. But when you think about the health and the dental benefits, the retirement package, those sorts of things are typically not negotiable, at least in any substantive way, and particularly for those at their first jobs or even mid-career. If you think about it, maybe you've experienced this. Even parking is typically not negotiable. Either you can sign up for it at some cost, or you can waive it. And in fact, parking is one of those benefits that's often protected by a fairness policy of some sort or another at an institution, right? They're going to offer parking to everyone, and no one gets a special deal. So that's the start of my answer on that. But what benefits in retirement packages are negotiable? Well, they're going to be negotiable at, I think, some higher levels, maybe at the division chief level, almost certainly at a chair level, or if you're being recruited for a vice president job, say VP of medical affairs. But as I said, most often when you're applying for your first EM position, the basic benefits are mostly fixed and non-negotiable.
All right. So certainly something important to know. Back to, again, the practicality aspect of things. What is negotiable?
Yeah. So I really want to get to that because it's not all negative. You have a lot of freedom, and a lot of that freedom will be generated by you and what you bring to the table. So let's talk about some basic things that are negotiable. How about a start date? That is often negotiable. No one wants to start on July 1st when they finish their fellowship the next day. Maybe you want to take 2 or 3 months off. Maybe you want a month in the middle of your first year to go to Europe, something like that. So that is absolutely negotiable. Now, you may think, well, I don't want to come across as a curmudgeon in my very first moments there and say, well, I don't want to start right away. I would keep in mind that you got an offer. You're talking about a start date. Clearly, they want you to join their program. I don't really think that most institutions will push back against a negotiated start date. So I would say go for it, whatever you're good with. Now, some of the tougher items are clinical time. That often can be a little bit dicey in the negotiations, but that's okay. Now, some offers will be fixed. The position out there may be quoted as, we're looking for a full-time faculty or staff physician. Or on the other hand, they may be looking for something part-time, a 0.5 or a 0.75 FTE spot. So in the end, though, you can negotiate off of either of those, because what you want to do is get your foot in the door, show them all of your strengths. That sets the hook for them. And then you can negotiate back from whatever the job posting was to say, well, I'd like to work a little bit more than that. I'd like to work a little bit less. Once you've convinced them that you are what they're looking for, you're in a good spot to negotiate how much clinical time you're going to work. Now, aside from clinical time, what might be negotiable? Well, there are a number of non-clinical roles, including leadership roles, that might be negotiable. But I think you have to tread lightly and find out about those roles and how they fit in the nomenclature and the paradigm of how things are at the place that you're seeking to go. But you're bringing a package to the table, and you're going to talk about your special attributes. And so that's a sales tactic. These are the things that I do well. I can bring them to your program. That's part of your negotiation tactic. And second, what you bring to the table provides some leverage as to a higher salary, particularly if what you're bringing is something that adds revenue to the bottom line at that institution. You might want to argue for protected time for building a program such as a point-of-care ultrasound program, or maybe an outreach, community pediatric emergency medicine or emergency medicine programs, or a telehealth. Those are all things that you bring to the table that will allow you some leverage to ask for more salary or more time. You may not always get the answer that you like, but at least you have a starting point to work towards. And I think that there's a lot of talented people out there. You guys are going to be able to to work through those discussions.
Excellent. So you kind of summarized one of the rules that I teach the residents and my kids. It's one of my PEM rules. When you have nothing to lose, you can only win. You're offered the job, they want you. I've never heard of an institution that retracts their offer because you ask a lot of things. So you can always negotiate. You should ask and figure it out. Very good.
Right. And, part of negotiation is diplomacy. So the way you ask for things can make a huge difference. And later we're going to talk about, sort of some final comments. And part of that will be, talking to your mentor, talking to a trusted colleague, and working through some of how you're going to get your strengths across to them while diplomatically negotiating for what you want.
Excellent. Next thing, and again, this is like super important. I looked for my first job in 2016, not very long ago. And I remember very vividly, I wanted to be in an academic place where I can do teaching. But really, like one of the most important things was the salary. I already had 3 kids. I was a fellow for 3 years, a residency before that with 3 kids. I'm not ashamed to say it. I need money. What about the salary? Is that negotiable?
Yeah. So again, this is one of those things I would answer this way. The salary is negotiable, except when it's not. And what I mean by that is oftentimes when you're looking at your first job, the salary is going to be what the salary is at that institution. And it's because, as we alluded to before, there's a lot of boilerplate language in a contract. And usually the salary is, well, for a full-time position, this is what we pay. Maybe you're not coming with a lot of experience or a lot of skills that allow you to negotiate that salary. And that may seem like that's not how it goes in the business world, but the medical field is not always an exact representation of what we hear about from our colleagues in the business world. Things are not necessarily always as negotiable as we'd like. And so I would like you to consider this question from the perspective of the hiring institution. Maybe it's the division chief you're talking to, or the CEO, or the VP of medical affairs, whoever you're going to negotiate that salary with. Once those people at that level acquiesce to negotiating a salary, special deals start to happen. And I know this from being a division chief, that every time I offered someone a special deal, it didn't work out the way we thought it was going to work out. So someone wants protected time for a given role, a stipend for a specific effort, and so on. But no one in leadership really wants to give out those special deals, because notoriously special deals come back to bite them in the butt. So if Dr. Jones wants some extra time for doing this, or wants, Dr. Smith wants extra salary for doing something different than others, it usually turns into a mess. It's not great for morale, because treating people equitably is so important these days, and it's so scrutinized. And special deals are simply the antithesis of equity. At least that's the risk. So from the perspective of who's hiring you, that's why I think there's some reticence to negotiate the salary, particularly when it's a standard position with standard clinical time, academic expectations, plus or minus, administrative expectations, plus or minus. That's especially true in an academic institution. A full-time position is typically comprised of some number of shifts or hours, and an obligation to contribute to scholarly work, maybe administrative role to some extent, educating some domain of leaders, and so on. Alternatively, non-academic positions may be more based simply on clinical time, either an hourly or a shift rate, or a salary for a given amount of clinical time over the course of a year. So you'll have to see what's out there and get a sense of just how negotiable that salary is. Now, maybe there's some angles you can work. Perhaps you're willing to work more hazard hours at a higher rate or salary, or you can reduce your total monthly hours if you're working more hazard hours. That's something that's worth exploring. But if you're being recruited for a leadership position, whether it's a chief or a director of a division, a medical director of the ED, fellowship director, program coordinator, those sorts of things, salary really should be negotiated commensurate with the going rate at other similar institutions. And that's something you can research, find out more about, bring that to the table, again, in a very diplomatic fashion. So I guess in summary, salary is sometimes negotiable, but I would consider the circumstances about what your job is, how standard the job position is, and what it looks like in comparison to other jobs. It's really hard to expect a special deal, though. But not that being said, you got special skills, special experience. Those are part of the negotiation process and can get you either protected time, clinical time, or a higher salary.
Excellent. No, I agree, and I can totally see that. Again, one of the reasons I tell my emergency medicine residents and my PEM fellows, develop some kind of special skill within PEM, something you can kind of pitch in on your job interview process. So hopefully it will give you that negotiable spots.
Yeah, that's great advice. Great advice.
Going back to the start of this process, Rick, the survey did tell us that only about half of our responders were considering looking for a job had a drafted written cover letter. What do you say about that?
Well, when we included this in our survey because we were curious about, what is typical for people to be preparing as they get ready to look for a new job. And a cover letter is really important. In fact, I think it may be critical to setting the hook when you're trying to encourage a prospective new employer to look your way, because it may be the only chance you have to get them interested.
And you, Rick, have a lot of rules. I learned a lot of my rules from you, hence the podcast PEM Rules. Do you have some rules that apply to cover letters?
Yeah, I can't imagine I don't have a rule for this. I would say, first off, that a cover letter can serve as a mini personal statement, or if you like this other term, it can serve as an elevator pitch, because you really want to get the door a little bit open when you're first making that outreach. So my rule for a cover letter is the same rule that I teach when I'm counseling even high school students, college students, medical students, residents, fellows, when they write their personal statement. You want it to be brief, concise, to the point. But my rule is this: tell people who you are, what you've done, what you want to do. Those are the three things to include. Nothing more, nothing less, but they're really important. The common thread of all of that is, what are your core values? What's important to you? That's who you are. And then using what's important to you and your core values, like a work ethic and integrity. What have you done with that? What's the evidence? And then what do you want to do? It's a really convincing argument and can be done in pretty short fashion. You can tell I'm adamant, I'm passionate about this rule because it's really, the cover letter is really your first interview. It's like we used to tell you, Hiron, when we were talking to our fellows, your fellowship is a 3-year interview. Your cover letter now is your first interview for your new job. It may be your only chance to get your foot in the door, set the hook, as I like to say. So imagine, you're at a meeting and you're doing some network. That first impression is really critical. You have just a little bit of time to make the impression. And so for the case of the cover letter, you have just a little bit of space to get your future employer interested in hiring you.
Yeah, it's great stuff. I agree 100%. And I agree with exactly what you said. I think of the cover letter as a mini preview of what the person who interviews is about to meet. So it's kind of like a first impression. You only get one chance in first impression. So yeah, excellent advice.
And I think people have often, approaching this like an elevator pitch, I think is pretty familiar to people. And that's why I have a rule for it. Tell people who you are, what you've done, what you want to do.
Excellent. What about, we got the interview, send the cover letter, CV, and you're invited as a candidate for a faculty position. You're invited for an interview. Do you have any guidance for the interview day or the interview process, the actual interview?
Well, I'm not going to say anything that's new to anybody here. We all have heard countless times, how to interview well. But I do have, some general advice. Maybe I have a few rules. But again, hopefully they'll be familiar to everyone. But let's drive home the point. My first bit of advice is just to be ready for your interview. And we mentioned this before. Speak to your mentor or a trusted colleague to test out responses to questions like, "What are you going to bring to our program?" Um, practice answering the usual questions that you think are going to happen in an interview, and always look to apply that rule of the personal statement. So at some point when you're asked a question, you're going to be able to talk about who you are or what you've done or what you want to do or some combination of those. So don't be afraid to speak to your core values and what's important to you. That you have a great work ethic. It's important for you to do well at whatever is put before you. Those sorts of things. People like to hear that. They want to hear about someone who believes in themselves and believes that they can bring great things to their program. So if I had to list just a few rules for interviewing, again, I think we've heard a lot of this advice, but don't be late. That's kind of first and foremost. As our soccer coaches used to tell us, if you're not 5 minutes early, you're late. So be really respectful of people's time. That's part of what don't being late is all about, but it also shows your attention to detail. And then this is a great one, which I think most of us have heard for years. Treat the administrative staff like gold. If there's one person in all of the interview process that can sabotage your chances to get a new job, it's that administrative person who you didn't treat well. So I think common courtesy is always appreciated, and gratitude for the help that administrative staff gives you goes a long way. A rule that I've sort of inserted that I hope people will be familiar with is to review your social media presence. You can't change the past, but if there are things that you think don't reflect well or things from long ago, get them off your social media. It's important. People now look at others' social media presence as part of who they are. It's sort of like when they don't feel like they're on stage, maybe there's something out there that doesn't reflect well. So think about that at least. I'd also tell you to research the program, not to necessarily impress them with your knowledge of the program, but to learn about the strengths that you want to be part of. Then you can articulate that during your interview. And then what are the opportunities? You don't want to speak to weaknesses. No one across the interview table wants to hear a prospective, a candidate for a position talk to them about their weaknesses. What they want to hear is, "Hey, I love this about your program. I want to be part of that. And I see that point of care ultrasound is a great opportunity here. I'd love to help you build that." And in that light, contribute to your itinerary. Who are you going to meet with? Think about someone who may not be on the itinerary and make those suggestions. And be ready to discuss how you can contribute. And when you're doing that, a rule I like to give people is use the I word a lot. That means talk about yourself with confidence. I was involved in this project and I led the following accomplishment. Talk about yourself. Use strong language. Participating in a project is not strong language. You can tell someone, "Listen, I was really passionate about this. I got involved and my role was the following." That's a much more strong way of talking about it. You can be humble, but at the same time, you can be generous in how you describe your strengths. So those are a lot of the things we talk about. I'm sure there are more that your listeners have and that you know as well, Johan.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's a lot of common sense there, but certainly good advice for those of us who are not experienced. People who come out of fellowship. I remember it was basically for me, it was high school, military service, student, 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 and then all of a sudden I have to look for a job. So as much as it is common sense, it's not something most of us are familiar with. So those are really good advice. I appreciate that. Now, what about any other final thoughts about the process? We covered a lot of very practical advice. Any sort of a philosophical advice or philosophical thoughts about the process as well?
Well, you can tell that I'm kind of a cheerleader about this, but the reason for that is I really want to see people do well. There are so many good trainees. There are so many great people who have helped our trainees in our field get to where they are. And I'm a little bit distressed at how much of this imposter syndrome is out there. That is not feeling like we deserve a job or accolades or protected time and those sorts of things. And so I would urge you to change the nomenclature of imposter syndrome in a way that helps you bring your strengths to looking for the next step in your career. And so I like to describe imposter syndrome. I like to actually throw that term away and better describe it as simply a temporary memory loss of one's accomplishments and self worth. And if you change the nomenclature in your head that, well, I may not be great in this, or I may not be able to match up to someone else, and say, you know what? I've done a ton. Let me remember that, and let me convey that to my prospective next job or my next chief. So I would say, get past your doubts and start telling people who you are and what you're going to bring to the table. It all comes back to that. Who are you? What are your core values? What's important to you? What have you done? Communicate that and communicate the vision of how you see yourself and what you will bring to that program.
Excellent. Again, great advice. Great advice from someone who's experienced. Go a long way. Thank you so much for your time and so much for helping me put together the survey and getting those answers to people. I think this is very, very useful discussion, and I hope PEM Rules listeners will take a listen and benefit. You know the drill, Rick, by now. You had to choose the outro for the podcast. And I guess you did mention you like, what's that song by Heart? Not Heart.
Oh no, Owner of a Lonely Heart by Yes.
Owner of a Lonely Hearts by Yes was already used by Dr. Stephen Booth from Massachusetts. He's a child abuse physician for my residency. But I got you a Jimmy Buffett song. You like Jimmy Buffett, right?
Sure, yes.
Does
yes.
Pencil Thin Mustache ring a bell?
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
So,
I never had one, but
me neither.
I'd love to hear the song. yeah. Well, I appreciate that song. "Owner of a Lonely Heart" was loved by others. I just love the percussion, both the bass and the drums, and I know you do that very well.
I appreciate that.
But I will say in closing that I'm really delighted to have been asked to come back and talk a little bit more with you and your listeners. Your podcast is so successful, and I'm really proud of you and the podcast. I love listening. I'm a faithful listener, so I would wish you continued good luck, and I hope to hear back from the listeners.
Thank you very much, Rick. Again, thank you very, very much for your time. And that is it for today, guys. Thank you again so much for listening to PEM Rules and supporting the podcast, episode 100. Very exciting. I truly hope this discussion with Dr. Saladino will benefit you guys. If there's anything else PEM Rules can do for you with your job search, any questions you have, again, if you want to come on the show and have a discussion about an interesting patient you saw in the pediatric emergency department, or really any topic you want to discuss that you think will benefit the listeners, I'm always happy to have you on the show. Don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter and check out the Facebook and the website, and again, write whenever you want. My sincere apologies, Rick. Jimmy Buffett is not an artist I'm very familiar with at all, actually. This is my attempt to do some Jimmy Buffett or my acoustic guitar. This is called Paper Thin Mustache. Fun name. Thank you again for listening and have a wonderful day.